Well, John is a very special friend to me. He is actually one of the very first people who ever asked me how I felt about abortion. And I remember the conversation really well because I was shocked and terrified to my core. I mean, I had a pit in my stomach because I had no idea how to answer the question. I grew up in church, and I have two incredible Christian parents who love God more than anything in their life. And this was a question that was never asked. And so through the Dan Fisher campaign and through the people that you're hearing today, I now can answer that question. I'm very, very grateful for that. John is one of my favorite friends, him and his whole family. Very, very trustworthy. He's extremely upright. He compromises in absolutely nothing. And if his hair was down today, he would look like David Grohl from the Foo Fighters. So today he looks like a professor.
Thank you very much, Megan. Appreciate that. Okay, so it's 11, almost 30. I know that the scriptural, biblical, country Oklahoma time for lunch is noon. Amen. So we're going to get done at noon. Fortunately, Russell ripped off about 30% of my talking points, so I can just jump over that stuff and give you the stuff you need to know. What I want to do is talk about what the law is where we live, and how what we are trying to do by abolishing abortion is not unreasonable, it's not stupid, it's not something we can't do. And you all need to know how to answer these questions because they're going to come at you. They're going to come at you from people at church and your pastor and your friends. They're going to say, oh, you can't do that. So you need to know a little bit about how to give an answer. And so I'll just spend a few minutes doing that. First of all, have you all heard the term lex rex? Do you know what that is? That's Latin for law is king. And that is an idea that has pervaded Western civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years. The idea that the law is our king and that we have the rule of law. You hear that quite often here where we live. What that means is that we don't have a king, we don't have a person that we have to obey. We obey the law. And what's unique about where we live is that even our kings, our magistrates, are subject to the law. And I might use the word magistrate a lot as a catch-all word to reference anyone in authority or with power who are magistrates. Well, where we live, a magistrate is anyone with authority or power. They could be legislators, governors, judges, all sorts of law enforcement officials, county sheriffs, city sheriffs, county officials. Even the dog catcher has authority as a magistrate, and that's who I'm talking about. So let's begin by exploring the concept of law and ask ourselves, okay, if the law is our king and not a person, then what is it? What's the law? How do we know what it is that we are to obey? Well, we ought to base our law on God because He created us and He's been telling us who we are and how we should live since forever, based on His expectations of us, His creatures. So there are many different ideas or concepts we talk about when it comes to law, and they go by the name of justice, primarily. That's what we see over and over in Scripture. That's what Russell talked about, justice, doing what is right. We also talk about divine law. We talk about moral standards. Our founding fathers loved to talk about natural law. That was very popular in their day as they were putting our union together. The moral law, universal standards. Okay, all of these are a way of saying that this is what God's law for man is. They're sort of interchangeable ideas, and they should be the basis of our law. Now, I love to ask this question of legislators, and I have had the opportunity to ask hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates and legislators over the years this question: should there be a correlation between our civil law and moral standards? And most of them look at me like I'm crazy and they don't understand the question. But do you think there should be some sort of relationship between our civil laws and universal moral standards? Absolutely. Otherwise, what is law anyway? Here's how I show that graphically. What this illustrates is that everything we legislate needs to be moral. Now, it's not that we need to legislate everything that's moral, but if we're going to legislate it, it had better be moral, or it should be no law at all. And in fact, we should be fighting against it, to overturn it, to get rid of it, because it's not just by its nature or by its definition. And this is the basis of the state and the country in which we live, the rule of just law. So this is what law should be. But what happens if God and his ideas for law are not the basis of law? Your only other option is to put man at the center. And this is where we find ourselves these days. Now, our founding fathers were fond of the phrase, the consent of the governed. Now, this is a great idea because the consent of the governed means that if someone is going to rule over us or be the boss and sort of administrate things, then he should have our permission to do that. We don't like tyrants and dictators. We don't want a military coup or a ruler who's going to throw us in a gulag if we don't obey him. What we want is someone who we say, you know what? We want you to administer justice for us. We consent for you to be in charge. That's what consent of the governed means. But what evil people do, what progressive leftist people do, is they redefine the terms on us. And so they've twisted this concept of the consent of the governed, and that's not what it means anymore in the common vernacular. What it means now is the will of the people, which also sounds nice, doesn't it? Oh, what's the will of the people? But the will of the people is really nothing more than majority rule, which is mob rule, which is the tyranny of the majority. If 50% of the people plus one want to do something, they say, well, that's the will of the people, so we can do it. It's justified, even if it's rape and murder and stealing or whatever it might be. So again, the concept of the consent of the governed has been twisted to mean the will of the people. Another common concept that is popular with man is the idea of equality. Now again, equality properly understood is great. That's the concept that each and every human being made in the image of God has intrinsic value and ought to be protected. They are worthy as reflecting the image of God. That's great, isn't it? But again, that's been twisted in our culture to mean socialism. Equality means we ought to all have the same stuff. It's not fair if you can afford a special education and a special cell phone and I just get bobos and can't go to a nice school. That's not cool. So again, we've taken the idea of equality and mangled it into a justification for socialism and of course court opinions. So when you look at the two of these and you ask yourself, what is the basis of law in the United States currently? Is it God's natural law or is it man's idea of law? The consent of what everybody just wants and socialism and court opinions. These can become the basis of the law. So what we've done is we've replaced God's universal standards with the will of the people. Whatever we all want, that is now the basis of our civil law. So what is the purpose of government when you consider those two things? Well, if God is the basis of it, he says, you know what? You need to protect life, liberty, and property. That's in the Ten Commandments, it's in the Old Law, and it's in the history of mankind back to the garden. God expects us to treat each other the way we want to be treated, which means we will value and protect each other's lives, liberty, and property. But if man is at the basis of law, then we end up assaulting life, liberty, and property. Quickly think of the laws that cycle through your brain right now that assault life, that assault liberty, and take your property. That is the majority of laws on the books, is it not? And that's where we live. So what happens to us? How is it that they get away with that? With a rich Western cultural heritage based on the rule of law and natural law and universal moral standards, how did we get where we are? How do they keep pulling the wool over everybody's eyes and they keep getting away with it? It's based on ignorance. It's based on our ignorance as a population. This is what happens when you put everyone in a dumbed-down government school and give them the same false education. Deception of the public is based on ignorance of the law. And here's how they get away with it. They get away with it by confusing and redefining terms. Okay? De jure law means by right or according to law. When you see de jure, just think jury or justice. It's the actual law as it's written down on the page, as it represents justice. But then there's something else entirely functioning in our society, and that's de facto law. As in the fact. In fact, this is just the way we do it. Never mind what the law says, never mind what the law intended, or any of that. This is just what we do. This is de facto law. And what happens is in our government schools and our talking heads on the media and in the periodicals, and the magazines and the newspapers, they all will talk about de facto law as if it were the real law. And they never define the difference, leaving the public to think that the way we just do things is actually the law when it's not. So we need to understand the difference. Now, if you don't understand the difference, then you will buy into and accept the lies that they tell you. So let me outline for you some of the legal lies that, broadly speaking, almost everyone in our society believes, because we've been told over and over ad nauseum. We've been told that abortion is constitutional. Over and over we hear that. When they covered the Free the States rally 2 weeks ago, they had this Shin lady on, and she just said, oh, it's unconstitutional. There's nothing they can do about it. And everybody just bobs their head like they're one of those little dashboard figurines. Oh, it's unconstitutional. We've been told that what's constitutional is defined by court opinions. The court tells us what the Constitution says and what it means. We've been told that officials are subject to the court, that every magistrate everywhere has to go along with whatever the court order says or the court opinion says. We've been told that we can only pursue regulation when it comes to abortion because it's unconstitutional. We've been told that we have to wait for judges to change their minds. We have to wait for the court to fix this. They have to change their minds. We have to be patient. We're always told this one, right? We have to wait. We didn't get here overnight. We have to go baby steps back the other direction. Have you heard this one? Especially at church? We have to change the culture. We have to be salt and light. We have to change the culture. If we'll just go out there and preach the gospel and just reach as many people as we can, one at a time, eventually we'll change enough hearts, we'll change enough minds, and the culture will follow. Is that true? It is. If we could change enough hearts and minds, the culture would change. But the reality is we can't ever reach enough people one at a time to affect public policy. You and I could each convert somebody every single day, but can we keep up with the nation's public universities that are cranking out these socialist heathens? We can't keep up. So there has to be a different solution. The law, Paul says, is a teacher. There's a reason that people didn't drive 120 miles an hour on the interstate to get here today. Because there's a sign that tells you what the law is, and they enforce it. Public policy changes culture way more effectively than one-on-one preaching, although they're both very important. And what is the biggest strategic lie of all that we have been told when it comes to abortion? This is it. This is the biggie, the doozy. We have to elect a pro-life president. Every 4 years, this becomes the mantra in churches. We have to elect fill in the blank. Reagan, Bush, Trump, whatever, fill in the blank. McCain, who's the crazy guy that believes the cultic stuff up in Utah that ran for president? Romney, yeah. We got to vote for these guys because they will give us pro-life judges who will reverse Roe v. Wade, right? That's what we've been told. It's not true. Practically, it'll never work, and legally, it's not even necessary. So let me go through both of those parts. Let's roll back the clock to 1972. You're looking at the makeup of the Supreme Court in 1972, the court that heard Roe v. Wade. Their opinion came out in January 1973. Already a majority of them were appointed by pro-life Republicans in 1972. So the Roe v. Wade decision was 7-4 abortion, 2 against. Now let's go down through history and ask ourselves, if our primary strategy for reversing Roe v. Wade is changing justices, could that happen? What would that look like? Well, let's just see what happened in history. Ford became president, he changed out one of the justices. Reagan became president, he got to change out 3, and then the first Bush got to change out 2. Oh my goodness. 20 years after Roe v. Wade, the court is stacked 8-1 in favor of pro-life Republican appointees. And guess what? There's only one guy left who voted for abortion. And guess what else happened in 1992? There was a new court case, came before the Supreme Court for review. If we were ever going to overturn Roe v. Wade, it would have happened right here, right now. What did this pro-life Republican court do in Planned Parenthood versus Casey? They upheld abortion. 5-4. And the Democrat even voted against abortion. Oh my goodness. What does this mean? This means that abortion in the United States was brought to you by pro-life Republicans. How many of you knew this? Is this strategy working? Should we expect it to work again in the next 20 or 40 years? No, that's ridiculous. Now, who is telling these lies? Why do we keep following this false strategy? Well, it's because the primary mouthpieces of the pro-life movement across the United States say this is the way you got to do it. This is who's telling these lies. The National Right to Life, Americans United for Life, Students for Life of America, National Pro-Life Alliance, and the Susan B. Anthony list. These are your biggest purveyors of these strategic lies. I'm sorry if you've donated to them in the past, if you've supported them in the past. I'm not judging you or saying you're a bad person. Maybe you didn't know. But look at what I'm saying and see if it's not true. Please consider redirecting those funds to organizations like mine in the Ekklesia and Free the States who are actually going to try to abolish abortion. Just to back up what I'm saying, let's take the Susan B. Anthony list, for example. Their founder and director, Marjorie Dannenfelser, just last year was in an interview and she said, "I am not a legal scholar." Keep that in mind. She said, "I am not a legal scholar." But then she said this, "Our whole strategy has been to make sure that the Senate and the President can work together to change the court, to overturn Roe, so that we can finally start passing laws against abortion." I'm not a legal scholar, but I'm setting legal strategy for the whole stinking country on how to stop abortion. That's who's telling the lies. Here's another great big lie that we're told over and over and over again, that we have 3 co-equal branches of government. Have you all heard that one? That's what they teach in school. That's what they say in the news media. Co-equal branches of government. Let me point you to Article 3, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, which says this: "The Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make." Imagine Rochambeau. Miss Lindy, why don't you be the gavel? Okay, the gavel represents the court, and I'll be a piece of paper, the Congress. Okay, are you ready? Let's do it. Rock, paper. Oh, the Supreme Court, sorry, Congress beats you. Congress always beats the court. They're not equal. Congress can put them in their place. Did you know this? So why are we fooling around trying to change the court when we could just tell the court, no, you can't do that? Okay, that's what could happen if we wanted to solve this problem at a federal level. Now, has anyone ever tried to do that? Have you ever heard of a congressman trying to do that? Do you guys remember Representative Ron Paul from Texas? 7 years in a row, he ran a bill in Washington called the Sanctity of Life Act. And here's what it said: "The Supreme Court shall not have jurisdiction to review anything that comes out of any statute that does what? Protects the rights of human beings between conception and birth." He also said they will not have jurisdiction for any statutes that prohibit the performance of abortions. And he went beyond that. He said also you can't review anything that would prohibit the provision of public funds, buildings, personnel, or any kind of assistance to abortion. So any law anywhere trying to restrict or even prohibit abortion would have been taken away from the Supreme Court. Did you know that this bill was run for 7 years? Did any of these pro-life organizations ever tell you about it? Now, Ron Paul's not in Congress anymore, but his son Rand is. He's not the same guy that his father was, but just last summer he said this: "The dirty little secret is that Republican leadership is blocking my amendment to defund Planned Parenthood. Now the public will know that many Republicans just pay lip service to pro-life issues and are really more concerned with bloated government spending than with saving lives." So I point this out to you to show that there is no answer from Washington. There is a mechanism where Congress could just take it off the table. By doing that, it would send it back to the states. But they're not fixing it in Washington. You might as well just skip that step. So we've been talking about what the legal lies are. Now let's talk about what the truth is. The truth is that abortion's not constitutional. We're going to go through the law. The Constitution tells us what is lawful, not people's opinion about it. Officials are subject to God. Every official in our union swears an oath of office. They swear before God to uphold the law. So the fight should not take place outside the court. It should actually take place against the court. Defying the court is actually the only legal and moral option we have. You just ignore them. And Russell talked about this, how in the 1850s states rose up and they just completely ignored federal laws sanctioning slavery. Guess what? It worked then. It's working now. There's people smoking pot recreationally in Colorado right now, completely against federal law. Nobody's doing anything about it. So why can't we do the same thing and save babies? Those federal laws against marijuana are unconstitutional. That state has the right to do that. We live in an interesting sort of representative republic where we have a hierarchy of law. We're in multiple jurisdictions, aren't we? We're subject to city laws, county laws, state laws, and federal laws. So there's kind of a hierarchy. Sometimes those jurisdictions might have competing laws or authority, and we have to figure out, well, which one do we have to obey? Which one trumps the other? So let's just go through this mental exercise together right now, and let me ask you, what is the highest law anywhere that any magistrate has to obey no matter what? God's law, right? If God says you shall not murder, you shall not murder. It doesn't matter what's on the stone or the parchment, does it? So God's law is the highest law of all. So let me ask you this. Do we even need another law to justify doing whatever is necessary as a magistrate to end abortion now? No, you don't, do you? You swear to God to faithfully administer justice. Who cares what the paper says? You stop it. Now, what's the next highest law in the sort of competing jurisdictions we have? The one that you have to obey, it trumps all the others when properly applied. Right? I heard Constitution. Yes, the United States Constitution would be our next highest law. So what does the United States Constitution say about abortion? Would it be constitutional? Well, the 5th and the 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution say, nor shall any state deprive any person of life without due process of law, or deny equal protection of the laws to any person. The states can't do that. You find that twice in the Constitution. Now, the 10th Amendment says, you know what? The powers that are not delegated to the United States are left to the people and to the states. Now, in Article 1, Section 8, we find all powers delegated to the United States. There's 17 of them. And they all have to do with delivering the mail, coining the money, managing the military, right? And some foreign trade agreements. That's it. They all fit into that. Civil, criminal law was never delegated to the federal government. That means, for example, that down in Alabama, a convicted rapist, they might take him out and hang him by the neck until dead if they want to. Whereas in California, they might put him up in a hotel for a couple of years and then let him out on good behavior. But you know what? They have the right legally to do that. That's criminal law. The states decide. So is abortion constitutional? No. It's a matter of criminal law which belongs in the first right, in the first place with the states. So legally, we are completely justified to ignore the court that was way out of line. What's the next highest law that we should look to? State Constitution would be the next one, wouldn't it? What does the Oklahoma Constitution say? Article 2, Section 2 says, all persons have the inherent right to life. Right here in Oklahoma. Article 2, Section 7 says, no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. Is abortion constitutional with the U.S. Constitution? No. Is abortion constitutional with the Oklahoma Constitution? No. Let me again take you back to the oath of office. Every magistrate in Oklahoma, when they take office, make this oath. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States and the Constitution and the laws of Oklahoma, and that I will faithfully discharge, according to the best of my ability, the duties of my office. So whether it's Governor Kevin Stitt, Pro Tem Greg Treat, Speaker Charles McCall, whether it is your county sheriff, your city sheriff, your House of Representative, your state senator, all of them have filed this with the Secretary of State. They've sworn it. We haven't even gotten to state statutes yet. Is anything else even needed to abolish abortion? Now, we also live in an interesting situation because we don't have kings that do everything. We don't have one person who writes law and the same person judges and the same person administers the justice. We divide it up. Different magistrates have different jobs. Now, if you're a sheriff or if you're a governor and you command troops, you command police officers, state troops, National Guard, whatever, you have men under your command, and their job is to go out and enforce the law. And these are the highest laws that you've sworn to uphold. Here's my question. Does a chief executive even need to wait on a legislature or anybody else to stop innocent children from being murdered? It's not even necessary, is it? Had Dan Fisher been elected, he could have just taken state troops, sent them down to the places of child sacrifice and said, none shall pass, and stop the slaughter without anything else. Now, we do need to change the law, don't we? Otherwise, we haven't established justice, and the Attorney General doesn't know how to charge murderers and take care of them. But we can still stop the shedding of innocent blood, and we would be right to do so. What would be the next highest law that comes into effect? Now we get down to state statutes. What did the state statutes say here in Oklahoma? Well, in Title 21, we find a definition of homicide. Homicide is the killing of one human being by another in the Oklahoma statutes. But it also says that as used in this section, a human being includes an unborn child. The Oklahoma statutes already define abortion as a homicide. Wow. How about that? But wait, there's more. And here's where it gets dark. That's not the end of the definition. See, the definition concludes this way. Homicide shall not include a legal abortion. What's a legal abortion? To find out what that is, you have to go over to Title 63, where we regulate health care. And there you will find over 112 pages of statutes regulating abortion as health care and legalizing murder by abortion. These statutes tell who, what, when, where, why, and how you can murder a child legally by abortion. And they got into our statutes by pro-life politicians putting them there. Years of regulating abortion has legalized it in our state. Russell did a very good job of diving into those details, so I'm going to fast forward at this point. Those laws that they pass, I like to call pink, puff, and piffle. They're the kind of laws that sort of look good, sound good, feel good, but they don't really do anything good. And they have become the enemy of what is needed and necessary. They pass them year after year, growing those laws that legalize abortion. So I have several examples of them here that were supported by past pro tems, by past speakers of the House, by past governors, people like Todd Lamb and Mary Fallin, passed these bills over and over and over again, legalizing abortion, but never actually stopping it. You remember that bill that Russell talked about, where it says you can't kill a baby with like forceps or pliers or whatever? It's actually worse than the way he explained it. Because the exact wording of the bill was, you can't kill an unborn baby by using that instrument. So they're actually still using those instruments. It's just that they make sure they kill the baby first with some sort of poison or stabbing them in the head, and then they can go ahead and use the pliers to rip them apart. Again, they never really stop it. So what we've got is a really cozy arrangement between the pro-life lobbyists and the Republican establishment. See, the pro-life lobbyist comes along and says, well, we need you to pass this pro-life bill this year. It's pink, puff, and piffle. It sounds really good. It's going to make you be a super champion pro-lifer. And then the GOP establishment says, yep, we're going to get behind that. That's what we're going to do. And so because they pass it, then the pro-life group says, he's 100% pro-life. Then he puts it on all his campaign material and we all vote for him again. And then the pro-life lobbyist says, we won, the bill passed, send us more donations. We all send more donations. Then they all come back next year and do it over again. And another 5,000 babies die in our state. That's the game, that's the cozy arrangement. And that's why it's so important that Senator Joseph Silk is not going to play that game anymore. No more cozy arrangement. So I very quickly want to just highlight what his bill would do to fix Oklahoma statutes. You're looking at Title 21 again, the definition of the homicide. Now, Russell scared you to death by saying that this bill was 30 some odd pages long. That's because it has to delete or repeal all that garbage that's been passed over the last 40 years legalizing abortion. But very simply what it does is it gives a clear, simple, easy to understand definition of abortion, and then it comes right here into our statutes and it simply strikes out every reference anywhere to a legal abortion, thus fixing our statutes. Very simple. So we've talked about the legal lies that have been fed to us. We talked about the strategic lies that we have tried to follow to fix things. Let's talk about the strategic truth. What is it that we should be doing and how do we go about doing it? Pop quiz, who was the greatest, most awesomest king of the nation of Israel? David, some say. Saul, some say. Solomon, some say. You know what Scripture says? Scripture says King Josiah was the greatest king of Israel. That there was never one like him who had such zeal for justice in the law of God. The greatest of all. You find his story in 2 Kings chapter 23 and repeated in 2 Chronicles 34. When he came to power, the people had forgotten God's law. There's an interesting verse there talking about the culture when he came to power. And it said, at that time, the people were making their children pass through the fire. They were sacrificing their children to Molech and the Baals and to Ashtoreth when he came to power. How did he solve the problem? Did he put in place a 2-year education program to change the culture and teach people that child sacrifice is bad, okay? We really shouldn't be doing this? Is that what he did? Did he wait to gain a majority? Did he send out pollsters to count the priests of Baal and the priests of Yahweh to see if they had a majority yet so that he could determine the will of the people? That is not how he did it at all. He didn't wait to gain the majority. There were no gradual baby steps. He didn't wait for the culture to change. He changed it by calling the people together, telling them what the law was, and says, today we follow the law. That's the strategy we follow. Righteous men upholding justice. What can you do? We've been naive and guilty, but Jesus said, nah, you be shrewd as snakes, but innocent as doves. Be smart, be wise, use the right strategy, and be innocent when you do it. We have to understand the enemy's games and prepare ourselves with the right answers. That's what this has been about. By the way, if I could get Kyle or some helpers, I've got here. I need to pass these out to people. I want you to know that everything I've said today and more, I put in some notes for you because you're not going to remember everything I said, so you can take that with you. You all understand the enemy's game, so now we can call them on it. It means we have to focus the fight on the correct front. The correct front is not electing Donald Trump and hoping we get a better Supreme Court. That's the wrong fight. You're being misdirected. The correct fight is right here in Oklahoma on finding a leader who will administer justice now. That means you have to scrutinize, educate, and cajole those with moral duty and the legal authority. We're talking about magistrates here. So if you don't know who your state senator and representative are, you need to find out. And you need to ask them to co-sponsor Senator Silk's bill. You need to be emailing and contacting Kevin Stitt and saying, lead on this. We have to break up the cozy arrangement.
You know, when one of these fake pro-life groups comes out and talks about a personhood bill or a heartbeat bill or whatever, we don't fund that, we don't promote that, we ignore that. That is the enemy of what is needed and necessary. We support the righteous officials, we oppose the unrighteous officials, and that might mean that some of you have to run for office yourself. I've got a terrible liar and crook for a state senator, and I don't like it, but I may have to run against him. My chances of unseating him are about 1 to 3%. But someone has to hold them accountable by speaking up against their lies, and at the very least, they ought to have to spend money and lie some more and heap burning coals on their own heads. We have to apply pressure. Okay, that means calls and emails. It means office visits. It means dropping these flyers in districts. Everything we can do to apply pressure. The whole reason we apply pressure is the same reason the prophets of old did. Or how about that parable that we read about in Luke 18, right? The persistent plea, grant me justice. Every day the widow to the magistrate, grant me justice. The magistrate doesn't agree with her, but he says, dadgummit, she's wearing me out. Okay, here, you win. Okay, we have to apply pressure because some of them will do the right thing even if it's for the wrong reasons. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they're afraid of looking stupid or hypocritical or not being reelected, whatever. They still might do the right thing. And others, you might actually prick their conscience. They might repent. They might say, you know what, I'm going to do my duty. This is the right thing, and I'm going to do the right thing like Senator Silk is doing. Teach others about good policy. We've given you so much information today. And when you like and follow Free the States and Oklahomans United for Life and the Ekklesia of Oklahoma, you're going to continue to get information. You're going to continue to get ways that you can apply pressure and be engaged. But it's not enough to do it yourself. Bring others with you, okay? Be the Facebook warrior that talks about more than politics and the weather and whatever the latest funny meme is. That means supporting the Abolition of Abortion in Oklahoma Act. Get involved with like-minded activists. Do it. It's more fun when you do it together, right? There's nothing inherently fun about standing up for justice. We're trying to stop the shedding of innocent blood, okay? This is not the NFL. But when you do it together, in a way it's more fun. It's more enjoyable. When I go out to Flyer next weekend in Greg Treat's district, I'll be taking 3 friends with me. I got to have one guy drive. I got to have one guy to crack funny jokes. Another guy's got to jump out and hit that doorbell. I mean, put together a team, do it together. It's way more fun. Prepare yourself with apologetics. Be ready to give an answer for everything. Engage in evangelism. Okay, this is where I'm going to do a little commercial because what you're getting today is a crash course. For example, let me give you a biblical definition of apologetics. Dan Fisher referenced Colossians chapter 4 this morning, but he only did half the verse. Here's the whole verse, Dan. Preach it in context. He says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. But then he continues, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. This is a 3-point sermon in and of itself, ladies and gentlemen. Notice, first of all, that we approach outsiders. It's proactive. You're not sitting around twiddling your thumbs, waiting for someone to come up to you and go, oh, I just see the light of Jesus shining off of you and I want what you have. Could you give me an answer for the hope that's in you? Right. It doesn't work that way. You start the conversation. Why? Because that's efficient. That's making good use of the time. And then he says, be gracious. It is hard enough for people to hear that they've been wrong, or that they're a sinner, or you name it. This is difficult. So don't make it worse by being a jerk or weird yourself. This is why you want training in apologetics. This is what I do full time with Oklahomans United for Life. I go and I visit churches, private schools, homeschool groups, social club, Bible school class, whatever. And I have 14 to 18 hours of training material. That when you go through that, you will feel like you can talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime about anything and have a productive conversation. And we specialize in teaching you to talk about abortion. But then I also do little crash course seminars, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever a group will give me, I'll give them the most I can in the amount of time I can. All right, that's my commercial. Can we abolish abortion in Oklahoma? Yes, we can. It begins with the will to do so. We see we have that right here. We choose the leaders who will do it, and then they just simply do it, using the proper strategy. Because legally we can, and as we've talked about, morally we must.